Welcome back everyone. Today we are going to start chapter 2 New Kings and Kingdoms. Many new dynasties emerged after the 17th century. Map 1 shows the major ruling dynasties in different parts of the subcontinent between the 7th and 12th century. So in this map there are the different dynasties between 7th century to 12th century. As you can see, the South India was in the hands of Cholas, Cheras, Pandyas, and near Kashmir also there are some there are no rulers specified here. Here is Indraprastha, which is Delhi, and Gurjars are in the middle part of the India, and Kanauj near Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. Banaras also there are some Chandelas and Palas here near Bengal, and Kalinga dynasty here. So you can see here these are the fluctuating frontiers shown in red lines. You can see here. So locate the Gurjara, Pratiharas, Rashtrakutas, Palas, Cholas and Chauhans. Can you identify the present day states over which they exercise control? So you can see here there are Rashtrakutas. So there are many, you can plot it here in the as the present name of the state. The emergence of new dynasties. By the 7th century, there were big landlords or warrior chiefs in different regions of the subcontinent. So by the 7th century, there were big landlords or war chiefs in different regions of the subcontinent. Existing kings often acknowledge them as their subordinates or samantas. So existing king acknowledge them as their subordinates. They were expected to bring gifts for the kings or overlords, be present at their court and provide them with military support. So they help them with the military support, and they were often present in their court. As Samantas gained power and wealth, they declared themselves to be the Mahasamantas, Mahamandaleshwar, the great lord of a circle or region, and so on. Sometimes they asserted their independence from their overlord. So they become puffed up with their power, and sometimes they even asserted independence from their overlords. So you can see here is a wall relief of the cave of Ellora showing Vishnu as Narsimha Deva, the man lion. It is the work of the Rashtrakuta period. So you can see here in the form of Narsimha Dev, he is killing the demon. One such instance was that of the Rashtrakutas in the Deccan. Initially, they were subordinates of the Chalukyas of Karnataka. So Rashtrakutas were the subordinate to the Chalukyas of the Karnataka. In the mid 8th century, Dantidurga, a Rashtrakuta chief, overthrew his Chalukya overlord and performed a ritual called Hiranyagarbha, literally the golden womb. So the Rashtrakuta chief Dantidurga overthrew the Chalukya overlord and performed a ritual called Hiranyagarbha. When this ritual was performed with the help of Brahmanas, it was thought to lead to be rebirth of the sacrificer as the Kshatriya, even if he was not born by birth. So in this sacrifice, they believe that the sacrificer would become a Kshatriya even though he was not born by his birth. In other cases, men from enterprising families used their military skills to carve out kingdoms. For instance, the Kadamba Mayura Sharman and the Gurjara Pratihara Harishchandra were Brahmanas who gave up their traditional professions and took to arms, successfully establishing kingdom in Karnataka and Rajasthan respectively. So these two guys were born in Brahmana families, but they dropped their professions and took arms to successfully establish their kingdoms in Karnataka and Rajasthan. Administration. So here is a question mark. Do you think being born as a Kshatriya was important in order to become a ruler during this period? Administration in the kingdoms. Many of these new kings adopted high sounding titles such as Maharaja, Adhiraja, Great King, Overlord of the King, Tribhuvana Chakravartin, Lord of the Three Worlds, and so on. So they were too much puffed up and they were using names like Tribhuvan Chakravartin and Maharaja Dhiraja and so on. However, in spite of such claims, They often shared power with their samantas as well as with associations of peasants, traders, and brahmanas. In each of these states, resources were obtained from the producers, that is, peasants, cattle keeper, artisans, who were often persuaded or compelled to surrender part of what they produced. So they took what they produced and they were persuaded to do the work. Sometimes these were claimed as rent due to the lord who asserted that he owned the land. So he represented himself as the lord, and he took the products as a rent, as he owned the lands. Revenue was also collected from traders. So traders were giving revenue to the lord. 400 taxes. The inscriptions of the Chola who taxed in Tamil Nadu refers to more than 400 terms for different kinds of taxes. So the Cholas who ruled the Tamil Nadu were taking more than 40 different types of taxes. The most frequently mentioned tax is Vetti, taken not in cash but in the form of forced labor. So Vetti was a form of forced labor, and Kadamai, or the land revenue. So the land revenue was also taken. There were also taxes on thatching the house, the use of ladder to climb palm trees, assess on succession to family property, etc. So to the succession of family property was also subjected to a cess. Any such taxes collected today? There is a question mark. In what way was this form of administration different from the present day system? These resources were used to finance the king's establishment as well as for the construction of temples and forts. They were also used to fight wars, which were in turn expected to lead the acquisition of wealth in the form of plunder and access to land as well as trade routes. So the money in the form of tax were used for construction of temple and forts, and also used for fighting wars. And as a result, when they win the war, they used to plunder the opposition and access the land as trade routes. The functionaries for collecting revenues were generally recruited from influential families. So the function of collecting revenues were the persons who were born in a nice good family, and the positions were often hereditary. So if the father was collecting the revenue, the son will also occupy the same position. This was true about the army as well. So the soldiers were also like this. If the father was a fighter, the son would also fight. In many cases, close relatives of the king held this position. So you all know that there are good family ties. So the king's relatives were used to often held these positions. Prashastis and land grants. Prashastis contain details that may not be literally true, but they tell us how rulers wanted to depict themselves as valiant, victorious warriors. For example, these were composed by learned brahmanas who occasionally helped in the administration. So the achievement of the Nagabhata. So many rulers described the achievement in Prashastis. You read about the Prashasti of the Gupta ruler Samudragupta last year. One Prashasti written in Sanskrit and found in Gwalior, Madhya Pradesh, described the exploits of Nagabhata, a Pratihara king, as follows. The king of Andhra, Sendhava, Vedarbha and Kalinga fell before him even as he was a prince. He won a victory over Chandrayuddha, the ruler of the Kanus. He defeated the king of Vanga, the part of Bengal, Anartha, Malava, Kirata, Turushka, Vatsa, Matsya. So this is the praise of the Lord who won these kinds of war, but these were not always true. Also see if you can find some of the areas mentioned in the inscription on map 1. Other rulers made similar claims as well. Why do you think they made these claims? King often rewarded Brahmanas by grants of land. These were recorded on copper plates, which were given to those who received the land. So this is a set of copper plates for recording the grants of land made by a ruler in the 9th century, written partly in Sanskrit and partly in Tamil. The ring holding the plate together is secured with the royal seal. So it had a royal seal in it to indicate that this is an authentic document. And so this was the copper plate. What was given with the land? This is part of the Tamil section of a land given by the Cholas. We have demarcated the boundaries of the land by making earthen embankments as well as by planting thorny bush. This is what the land contains: fruit bearing trees, waterland, gardens and orchards, trees, wells, open spaces, pasture land, a village, ant hills, platforms, canals, ditches, rivers, slate laden land, tanks, granaries, fish ponds, beehives and deep lakes. He who receives the land can collect taxes from it. He can collect the taxes imposed by judicial officers as fine, the tax on betel leaves, that on woven cloth as well as on vehicles. He can build large rooms with upper stories made of baked bricks. He can get large and small well dug. He can plant trees and thorny bushes. If necessary, he can get canals constructed for irrigation. He should ensure that water is not wasted and that embankments are built. List all the possible sources of irrigation mentioned in the inscription and discuss how these might have been used. Unusual for the 12th century was a long Sanskrit poem containing the history of king who ruled over Kashmir. It is composed by an author named Kalhana. He used a variety of sources including inscriptions, documents, eyewitness accounts and earlier histories to write his account. Unlike the writers of Prashastis, he was often critical about rulers and their policies. So the Kalhana was a person and an author who wrote about the kings in the 12th century, and he was not always praising the kings, but he was critical about the rulers and their policies. Warfare for wealth. You may have noticed that each of these ruling dynasties was based on in a specific region. So all these dynasties were based in a specific region. At the same time, they tried to control over other areas. One particularly prized area was the city of Kanauj in the Ganga Valley. For centuries, rulers belonging to the Gurjara, Pratiharas, Rashtrakutas and Pala dynasties fought for the control of Kanauj. Because there were three parties in this long-drawn conflict, historians often describe it as the tripartite struggle. As we will see from page 62 to 66, rulers also tried to demonstrate their power and resources by building large temples. So when they attacked one another kingdom, they often choose to target temples, which were sometimes extremely rich. You will read more about it in chapter 5. One of the best known of such ruler is Sultan Muhammad of Ghazni, Afghanistan. He ruled from 997 to 1030 and extended control over parts of Central Asia, Iran and the northwestern part of the subcontinent. He raided the subcontinent almost every year. His targets were wealthy temples, including that of Somnath of Gujarat. Much of the wealth Muhammad carried away was used to create a splendid capital city at Ghazni. So this was a king or Sultan Muhammad of Ghazni. He used to target big temples to plunder it and built a splendid city, capital city in Ghazni. So he was practically a thief. Sultan Muhammad was also interested in finding out more about the people he conquered and entrusted a scholar named Al-Biruni to write an account of the subcontinent. This Arabic work, known as the Kitab-ul-Hind, remains an important source for historians. He consulted Sanskrit scholar to prepare this account. Other kings who engaged in warfare, including the Chahamanas, later known as the Chauhans, who ruled over the region around Delhi and Ajmer. They attempted to expand their control to the west and the east, where they were opposed by the Chalukyas of Gujarat and the Gahadwalas of western Uttar Pradesh. The best known Chahamana ruler was Prithviraj III from 1168 to 1192, who defeated an Afghan ruler named Sultan Muhammad Ghori in 1191 but lost to him to the very next year in 1192. So the famous ruler of Chamana was Prithviraj III. He defeated the Afghan ruler, but the next year he was defeated by Sultan Muhammad Ghori himself. A closer look the Cholas. So you can see the Cholas was very expanded their kingdom over the South India from Kerala, Tamil Nadu and Andhra. So and a little bit of Karnataka also. So you can see he was they were very they had very power in the south. They hold power in South India. The Chola kingdom and its neighboring. So you can see here Tanjavur was there, Madurai, Pandya, Kanchi, and Gangavadi and Banavasai. So all this is in their control. From Urayur to Tanjavur, how did the Chalukya rise to power? How did the Cholas rise to power? A minor chiefly family known as the Muttaryar held power in the Kaveri Delta. They were subordinate to the Pallava kings of Kanchipuram. Vijayalaya, who belonged to the ancient chiefly family of the Chola from Urayur, captured the delta from the Muttaryar in the middle of the 9th century. He built the town of Tanjavur and a temple for goddess Nishumbha Sudini there. So Nishumbha Sudini temple was built there for goddess Nishumbha Sudini. The successor of Vijayalaya conquered neighboring regions and the kingdom grew in size and power. The Pandyan and the Pallava territory to the south and the north were made part of this kingdom. Rajaraja I, considered the most powerful Chola ruler, became king in 1985 and expanded control over most of these areas. So in 1985, Rajaraja I was a powerful Chola ruler and he expanded the control over most of these areas. He also recognized the administration of the empire. Rajaraja's son Rajendra I continued his policies and even raided the Ganga Valley, Sri Lanka and countries of Southeast Asia, developing a navy for these expeditions. Splendid temple and bronze sculpture. The big families of Tanjavur and Gangaikonda, Cholapuram, built by Rajaraja and Rajendra, are architectural and sculptural marvels. Chola temples often became the nuclei of settlement which grew around them. These were centers of craft production. Temples were also endowed with land by rulers as well as by others. The produce of this land, you can see here the temple of Gangaikonda Cholapuram. Notice the way which is the roof tapers. Also look at the elaborate stone sculpture used to decorate the outer wall. So you can see a very beautiful temple was built by these guys. The produce of this land went into maintaining all the specialists who work in the temple and very often lived near it. Priests, garland maker, cooks, weavers, musicians, dancers, etc. In other words, temples were not only place of worship, they were the hub of economic, social and cultural life as well. So temple were not only a place for worship, it was also a hub for economic, social and cultural life. Amongst the crafts associated with temples, the making of bronze image with the most distinctive was the most distinctive. Chola bronze image are considered among the finest in the world. While most images were of deities, sometimes images were made of devotees also. So the bronze images were made of the deities as well as of the devotees as well. So you can see here is a Chola bronze sculpture. And notice how carefully it is decorated. To find this out how these images were made, see chapter 6. So we'll see how these were made in chapter 6, but this is a very beautiful image. You can see here agriculture and irrigation. Many of the achievements of the Cholas were made possible through new developments in agriculture. So the Cholas were very much improved in their agricultural activities. Look at map 2 again. Notice that the river Kaveri branches off into several small channels before emptying into the Bay of Bengal. So before the river Kaveri empty into the Bay of Bengal, it is distributed into several channels. These channels overflow frequently, depositing fertile soil on their banks. Water from the channels also provide the necessary moisture for agriculture, particularly for the cultivation of rice. So the land is moist and it is most favorable for the cultivation of rice. Although agriculture had developed earlier in the other parts of Tamil Nadu, it was only from the 5th or 6th century that this area was opened up for a large scale cultivation. Forest had to be cleared in some regions, land had to be leveled in other areas. In the delta region, embankment had to be built to prevent flooding, and canals had to be constructed to carry water to the fields. In many areas, 2 crops were grown in a year. So in many areas, 2 crops were grown. In the figure 5th, a 9th century sluice gate in Tamil Nadu, it regulated the outflow of water from a tank into the channel and irrigated the field. A sluice gate is traditionally a wood or metal barrier which is commonly used to control water levels and flow rates in rivers and canals. So it is used to control the flow rate and flow rate of river and canals. So you can see it here. In many cases, it was necessary to water crops artificially. A variety of method was used for irrigation. In some areas, wells were dug. In other places, huge tanks were constructed to collect rainwater. So in some places, wells were dug, but in some places, huge tanks were constructed to collect rainwater. Remember that irrigation work requires planning, organizing labor and resources, maintaining these works and deciding on how water is to be shared. Most of the new rulers as well as people living in the village took an active interest in this activity. So the agricultural activity requires planning, organizing labor and resources. So for the irrigation purpose, many people in the villages and the rulers took interest in these activities. The administration of the empire. How was the administration organized? Settlements of peasants known as Ur became prosperous with the spread of irrigation agriculture. Group of such villages formed larger unit called Nadu. This village council and the Nadu performed several administrative functions including dispensing justice and collecting taxes. Rich peasants of the Velila caste exercised considerable control over the affairs of the Nadu under the supervision of the central Chola government. The Chola kings gave some rich landowners title like Muvendra Velan, a Velan or peasant serving 3 kings, Arayar, chief, etc., as markers of respect and entrusted them with important offices of the state at the center. So type of land. Chola inscription mentions several categories of land. Velan Vegai, land of non-Brahmana peasant proprietors. Brahmadaya, land gifted to Brahmanas. Shala Bhoga, land for the maintenance of a school. So Devadana Tirunamattukani, land gifted to temples. Pallicha Chandanam, land donated to Jaina institutions. So these were the types of land. We have seen the Brahmanas often received large land grants or Brahmadaya. As a result, a large number of Brahmana settlements emerged in the Kaveri Valley as in other parts of the South India. Each Brahmadaya was looked after by an assembly or sabha of prominent Brahmanas landholders. These assemblies worked very efficiently. Their decisions were recorded in details in inscriptions, often on the stone walls of temples. Associations of traders known as Nagarams also occasionally performed administrative functions in towns. Inscriptions from Uttaramerur in Chingleput district, Tamil Nadu, provide details on the way in which the sabhas was organized. The sabhas had separate committees to look after irrigation, work, gardens, temples, etc. So they had committees for these things. Names of those eligible to be member of these committees were written on a small ticket on palm leaf. So the name of members who were eligible were written on a ticket of palm leaf. These tickets were put into a earthenware pot from which a young boy was asked to take out the ticket one by one for each committee. So a young boy would put hand inside the earthen pot and take out this ticket one by one for each committee. So inscriptions and texts. Who could be a member of a sabha? The Uttaramerur inscription laid down all those who wish to become members of the sabha should be owner of land from which land revenue is collected. They should have their own homes. They should be between 35 and 70 years of age. They should have knowledge of the Vedas. They should be well versed in administrative matters and honest. If anyone has been a member of any committee in the last 3 years, he cannot become a member of another committee. So if someone was a member, if anyone has a member in any committee in the last 3 years, he cannot become a member of any other committee. Anyone who has not submitted his accounts and those who of his relative cannot contest the election. So one should submit their accounts in order to contest. While inscriptions tell us about the kings and powerful men, here is an excerpt from the Periya Puranam, our 12th century Tamil work, which inform us about the lives of ordinary men and women. On the outskirts of Adanur was a small hamlet of Pullayas, a name used for the social group considered outcast by Brahmanas and Velalas, studded with small huts under old thatches and inhabited by agrarian laborers engaged in menial occupations. So they were engaged in agricultural and menial labors. In the thresholds of the huts covered with strips of leather, little chickens moved about in groups. Dark children who wore bracelets of black iron were prancing about, carrying little puppies. In the shade of the Marudu Arjuna tree, a female laborer put her baby to sleep on a sheet of leather. There were mango trees from whose branches drums were hanging, and under the coconut palm, in little hollows on the ground, tiny headed bitches lay after whelping. The red crested cocks crowned before down, calling the brownie Pullayar plural to their day's work. And by day, under the shade of the kanji tree, spread the voice of the wavy haired Pulaya woman singing as they were husking paddy. So there is a question mark. Were there any Brahmanas in this hamlet? So it is clear that there were no Brahmanas there. Describe all the activities that were taking place in the village. Why do you think temple inscriptions ignore these activities? So it is a nice question. China under the Tang dynasty. In China, an empire was established under the Tang dynasty, which remained in power for about 300 years. From the 7th to 10th century, its capital, Xi'an, was one of the largest cities in the world, visited by Turks, Iranians, Indians, Japanese, and Koreans. The Tang Empire was administered by a bureaucracy recruited through an examination, which was open to all who wished to appear on it. For it, this system of selecting officials remained in place with some changes till 1911. So there is a question mark. In what way was this system different from those prevalent in the Indian subcontinent? So here the chapter is finished.